An 18-year-old bride, a widowed sheriff, 4 broken children, a marriage born of desperation, not love. But when Rebecca Martinez said yes to Sheriff Cole Hartwell, she had no idea that saving his family would cost her everything. Rebecca Martinez smoothed her trembling hands over the faded blue dress that had belonged to her mother, trying to steady her breath as she stood outside the small wooden church in Millbrook. At 18, she should have been dreaming of romance, of a husband who courted her with flowers and sweet words. Instead, she was about to marry a man she'd spoken to exactly 3 times, a man whose eyes held nothing but tired desperation, and whose proposal had been more business transaction than declaration of love. Sheriff Cole Hartwell needed a wife to care for his 4 orphaned children. Rebecca needed a roof over her head and food in her belly. It wasn't love, but it was survival, and in a town like Millbrook, survival trumped everything else. The church door creaked open and Cole appeared, his tall frame filling the doorway. He wore his best shirt, pressed but showing its age, and his dark hair was slicked back with water that was already beginning to curl in the summer heat. His badge caught the afternoon light, a reminder of the responsibility that never left his chest, even on his wedding day. Behind him, 4 small faces peered out like frightened animals, the children who had made this marriage necessary. Rebecca's heart clenched as she looked at them. Emma, barely 6, with tangled blonde hair and a thumb permanently stuck in her mouth. The twins, Mary and Matthew, 8 years old and mirror images except for the defiance in Matthew's eyes and the fear in Mary's. And Samuel, the oldest at 10, who stood protective in front of his siblings like a miniature soldier ready for battle. Rebecca, Cole's voice was rough, uncertain. He stepped closer, his boots heavy on the wooden steps. You sure about this? Once we say those words, there's no going back. These children, they've been through hell. They're not easy. I'm not easy. This life isn't what a young woman like you should. Stop. Rebecca lifted her chin, surprising herself with the strength in her voice. I said yes 3 days ago, and I'm saying yes now. Those children need someone, and you need help. I need a home, that's enough. But even as she spoke, her hands shook. Was it enough? Could a marriage built on necessity ever become something more? The question terrified her more than she cared to admit. Cole studied her face for a long moment, searching for doubt, for the regret that had to be there. When he found none, or at least none she was willing to show, he nodded slowly. Then let's do this. He turned to the children, his voice gentling in a way that made Rebecca's chest tight. Kids, this is Rebecca. She's going to take care of you now, like a mama would. Emma burst into tears. Not the gentle tears of joy Rebecca had foolishly hoped for, but raw, heartbroken sobs that echoed off the church walls. I don't want a new mama. I want my real mama. She buried her face in Samuel's shirt, and the older boy wrapped his arms around her, his young face hard with a pain no child should carry. Emma, please, Cole began, but Matthew stepped forward, his small hands clenched into fists. She's not our mama, the boy's voice cracked with emotion. She doesn't even know us. Why are you making us do this? His accusation hung in the air like smoke, choking and inescapable. Rebecca felt her heart break for these children who had lost so much, but she also felt something else, determination. She knelt down, bringing herself to their level, ignoring the dust that gathered on her wedding dress. You're right, Matthew. I'm not your mama and I can't replace her. I don't even want to try. The boy's eyes widened in surprise. But I can be someone who cares about you. Someone who will make sure you have clean clothes and hot meals, and someone to bandage your knees when you fall. That's all I'm asking for. A chance to show you that caring about you isn't the same as trying to replace what you lost. Samuel, the oldest, studied her with eyes far too wise for his 10 years. What happens if you change your mind? What happens if you decide we're too much trouble and leave like everyone else does? The question hit Rebecca like a physical blow. How many people had these children watched walk away? How many promises had been broken? She reached out slowly, carefully, and took Samuel's small hand in hers. I can't promise that everything will be perfect, Samuel, but I can promise that I won't walk away. Not when things get hard, not when you test me, and you will test me not ever. When I say those words in there, I'm not just marrying your father. I'm choosing all of you. Forever." Cole watched the exchange with something like wonder in his eyes. He'd expected Rebecca to be overwhelmed, to perhaps reconsider when faced with the reality of his children's pain. Instead, she was meeting them where they were, in their fear, in their anger, in their desperate need to protect themselves from another loss. For the first time since he'd made his awkward proposal, Cole felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, this could work. The ceremony itself was brief, conducted by Pastor Williams, who had known Rebecca since she was a child. There were no guests beyond the 4 children, who stood silent and watchful, no flowers, no music. Just the simple exchange of vows that bound 2 strangers together in the eyes of God and the law. When Cole slipped his mother's thin gold band onto Rebecca's finger, his hands were steady, but hers trembled like leaves in a storm. The ring was too big, loose enough that she had to curl her finger to keep it from sliding off, a reminder that she was trying to fill a space that had been shaped for someone else entirely. "You may kiss the bride," Pastor Williams said gently, and Rebecca's breath caught. In all her nervous preparation for this moment, she'd somehow forgotten about this part. Cole's eyes met hers, and she saw her own uncertainty reflected there. He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away, and pressed his lips gently to hers. It was chaste, careful, the kiss of 2 people who barely knew each other trying to navigate something as fragile as spun glass. But when he pulled away, Rebecca felt a strange warmth spread through her chest. Not love, it was too soon for that, but something like possibility. The walk to Cole's house should have been a celebration, but instead it felt like a funeral procession. The children trailed behind in silence, Emma still sniffling into Samuel's shirt. Rebecca tried to make conversation, pointing out the shops and neighbors they passed, but her words fell flat in the oppressive summer air. Cole walked beside her, close enough that she could smell the soap he'd used and feel the tension radiating from his shoulders. Every few steps, he would glance at her as if still not quite believing she was real, that she had actually gone through with this insane plan. The house, when they reached it, was exactly what Rebecca had expected and somehow worse. It sat at the end of Main Street, a 2-story structure that had once been white but now faded to the color of old bones. The front porch sagged slightly, and the shutters hung at odd angles. The yard was nothing but dirt and weeds, with a few struggling flowers that someone, Cole's first wife, presumably, had planted long ago. It looked like what it was. The home of a man too overwhelmed to keep up with anything beyond the bare necessities of survival. "It's not much," Cole said quietly, and Rebecca heard the apology in his voice. "Sarah used to keep it nice, but after she died He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "It's fine," Rebecca lied, forcing a smile. "It just needs some attention. We'll make it beautiful again." The word we felt strange on her tongue, but she meant it. This was her home now, these were her children, and this man was her husband. The reality of it hit her like a landslide, sudden and overwhelming. What had she done? Inside, the house was clean but sparse, with the kind of tidiness that came from having nothing extra to leave lying around. The furniture was worn but sturdy, and everything had the look of being carefully maintained by someone who understood the value of what they had. Cole's first wife had clearly been a woman who made do with what she had, and Rebecca felt a pang of inadequacy. How could she possibly measure up to a woman who had been loved enough to be mourned this deeply? "Rebecca," Cole began, but Emma's voice cut through the moment. "I'm hungry." The little girl's voice was small and plaintive, and Rebecca realized that in all the chaos of the day, no one had thought about dinner. "Of course you are, sweetheart." Rebecca knelt down again, and this time Emma didn't pull away. "What do you usually like to eat?" "Mama made biscuits," Emma whispered, and the pain in her voice made Rebecca's eyes sting with unshed tears. "I make biscuits too," Rebecca said gently. "Would you like to help me?" She looked up at Cole, who nodded toward the kitchen. "We'll figure it out together." But as Rebecca stood and looked around at the 4 children who were now her responsibility, at the house that was now her home, at the man who was now her husband, She felt the weight of what she'd taken on settling around her shoulders like a lead cloak. This wasn't a fairy tale. There would be no magic transformation, no instant love, no happily ever after that didn't require more work than she'd ever imagined. The children were watching her with a mixture of hope and skepticism that made her want to both cry and run. Cole was looking at her like she might disappear at any moment, and maybe she might. Maybe this had all been a terrible mistake. Then Matthew, the defiant twin who had challenged her at the church, slowly walked over and tugged on her dress. "I know where Mama kept the flower," he said quietly, and Rebecca's heart nearly broke with gratitude for this small offering of trust. The first week nearly broke her. Rebecca had imagined that caring for 4 children would be challenging, but she hadn't anticipated the depth of their grief or the way it manifested in 100 small rebellions that left her questioning every decision she made. Emma refused to eat anything Rebecca cooked, pushing away plates with the stubborn determination of someone twice her age. The twins had developed an elaborate system of silent communication that excluded everyone else, whispering secrets and sharing looks that made Rebecca feel like an intruder in her own home. And Samuel, sweet Samuel who had shown her where the flower was kept, had taken it upon himself to become the household's unofficial supervisor, correcting everything from the way she folded laundry to how she swept the floors. "Mama didn't do it like that," became the refrain that followed Rebecca through every room, every task, every attempt to establish some kind of routine. She tried to be patient, tried to remember that these children were mourning not just their mother but the entire life they'd known before. But by Thursday evening, when Emma threw her dinner plate across the kitchen and screamed that she hated biscuits and wanted her real mama, Rebecca found herself locked in the pantry, crying into her apron like a child herself. That's where Cole found her when he returned from his evening rounds. She heard his boots on the kitchen floor, heard him talking quietly to the children, and then the pantry door opened to reveal his concerned face. "Rebecca, what are you doing in here?" She wiped her eyes quickly, embarrassed to be caught in such a state. "Just checking our supplies, making sure we have enough flour for tomorrow." It was a pathetic lie, and they both knew it. Cole stepped into the small space, making it feel impossibly cramped. Up close, she could smell the dust of the trail on him, see the lines of exhaustion around his eyes. "They're giving you hell, aren't they?" His voice was gentle, understanding, and somehow that made it worse. "I don't know what I'm doing wrong," Rebecca whispered, fresh tears threatening. "I try to cook the way you said Sarah cooked. I try to keep the house the way she kept it, but nothing I do is right. They hate me, Cole, and maybe they should. Maybe this was all a mistake." Cole was quiet for a long moment, and Rebecca feared he was about to agree with her, to say that yes, this had been a mistake and they should find some way to undo it. Instead, he surprised her by reaching out and gently touching her cheek. "They don't hate you, Rebecca. They're scared. Scared of forgetting their mama, scared of caring about someone new who might leave them too. And you know what? Trying to be Sarah isn't going to help any of us." "But how else am I supposed to?" "Be yourself." Cole's voice was firm now, almost commanding. "These children don't need another Sarah. They need Rebecca. They need someone who will love them for who they are, not who they used to be." He paused, his thumb brushing away a tear from her cheek. "And so do I." The admission hung between them like a bridge Rebecca wasn't sure she was brave enough to cross. In the dim light of the pantry, with the sounds of the children settling down for the night drifting through the walls, she found herself looking at her husband, really looking at him, for the first time since their wedding day. There was kindness in his eyes, yes, but also something deeper, something that looked dangerously like the beginning of real affection. "Cole," she began, but he stepped back, the moment broken. "Come on," he said, clearing his throat. "Let's get you out of here before the children think we've both lost our minds." The next morning brought a crisis that forced everything into sharp focus. Rebecca woke to the sound of Emma's terrified screaming from the children's room. She rushed upstairs to find the little girl burning with fever, her small body shaking with chills despite the summer heat. Mary and Matthew huddled in the corner, wide-eyed with fear, while Samuel stood at the foot of Emma's bed looking like he was about to cry. "Get Papa," Rebecca commanded, and Samuel ran without question. She gathered Emma into her arms, feeling the dangerous heat radiating from the child's skin. The little girl was delirious, calling for her mama in a voice so broken it made Rebecca's heart ache. By the time Cole appeared, Rebecca had already begun stripping the bed and calling for cool water. "Doc Henderson," Cole said immediately, understanding the situation at a glance. "I'll get him." "No," Rebecca's voice was steady, sure. "You get the doctor. I'll stay with Emma. Matthew, I need you to pump water from the well. Mary, get me all the clean rags you can find. Samuel, watch your sister and brother and make sure they do exactly what I say." For the first time since their marriage, the children obeyed her without question. There was something in Rebecca's voice, in the way she took charge of the crisis, that commanded their respect. This wasn't the uncertain young woman who had been trying so hard to please them all week. This was someone who knew exactly what needed to be done and had the strength to do it. The next hours blurred together in a haze of cool cloths, whispered prayers, and the kind of fear that made breathing difficult. Dr. Henderson confirmed what Rebecca already suspected. Emma had scarlet fever, dangerous at any age but potentially fatal in a child so young. The doctor's treatments were limited to what Rebecca was already doing, keeping the fever down, making sure Emma stayed hydrated, and waiting to see if the child's small body could fight off the infection. "She'll need constant care," Dr. Henderson told them quietly, "day and night, and the other children." He didn't need to finish. They all knew that scarlet fever was contagious, that the entire family was now at risk. "I'll take care of her," Rebecca said without hesitation, "whatever she needs." Cole started to protest, to say that she shouldn't risk her own health, but Rebecca cut him off with a look that brooked no argument. "She's my daughter now, Cole. I'm not leaving her." And she didn't. For 3 days and nights, Rebecca barely left Emma's side. She bathed the child's fevered body with cool water, spooned medicine down her throat when she was conscious enough to swallow, and sang lullabies her own mother had sung to her when she was small. The other children brought her food and water, taking turns sitting with their sister when Rebecca finally collapsed from exhaustion. It was on the second night, when Emma's fever spiked so high that Rebecca feared they might lose her, that something fundamental shifted in the house. Mary crept into the room around midnight, her own face streaked with tears. "Is Emma going to die like Mama did?" Rebecca looked at the little girl, really looked at her, and saw not defiance or resentment but pure, terrifying love. Mary loved her sister desperately, completely, and the thought of losing her was destroying her. "I don't know, sweetheart," Rebecca answered honestly, "but I'm going to fight as hard as I can to make sure she doesn't." Mary nodded solemnly and climbed onto the bed beside her sister. "Mama used to sing to us when we were sick, 'Amazing Grace.' Emma likes that song." So Rebecca sang "Amazing Grace" in a voice hoarse from exhaustion and fear, and Mary joined in with her clear, sweet soprano. Soon Matthew appeared in the doorway, then Samuel, and finally Cole, all drawn by the sound of the hymn. They stood around Emma's bed like a family, not Sarah's family or Cole's family, but their family, and sang together in the lamplight while the youngest member of their household fought for her life. Emma's fever broke just before dawn on the 4th day. Rebecca woke slumped in the chair beside the bed to find the little girl's eyes open and clear, her skin cool to the touch. "I'm thirsty," Emma whispered, and those 2 simple words were the most beautiful sound Rebecca had ever heard. The recovery was slow but steady. Emma was weak for days, requiring careful nursing and constant attention. But as she grew stronger, something else began to heal in the house. The children stopped correcting Rebecca's methods and started helping her develop new ones. Samuel taught her how Emma liked her eggs cooked. Mary showed her where their mother had kept the good medicine. Matthew, still the most reserved, began leaving small gifts for Rebecca. Wildflowers picked from the prairie, smooth stones from the creek, a carved wooden horse that had belonged to him as a baby. And Emma, sweet Emma, who had rejected every kindness Rebecca had offered, began to seek her out. She would climb into Rebecca's lap during story time, braid flowers into Rebecca's dark hair, and fall asleep curled against Rebecca's side during afternoon naps. The transformation was gradual but undeniable. Rebecca wasn't replacing their mother. She was becoming something new, something uniquely hers. The change in Cole was even more dramatic. He began coming home for lunch instead of eating at the saloon. He lingered over dinner, listening to the children's chatter about their day. He helped with bedtime stories and morning chores. And sometimes, when he thought Rebecca wasn't looking, she would catch him watching her with an expression that made her pulse quicken and her cheeks flush with heat. It was during one of these moments, 3 weeks after Emma's recovery, that the second crisis hit. Rebecca was hanging laundry in the backyard when she heard horses approaching at a gallop. Cole appeared from the barn, his hand instinctively moving to his gun. A rider came into view, young, dusty, and clearly bearing urgent news. "Sheriff Hartwell," the boy called out. "The Jameson gang hit the bank in Cedar Falls yesterday. Word is they're heading this way, maybe planning to rob our bank too. Deputy Marshal wants all available men to form a posse." Rebecca felt the blood drain from her face. She'd heard of the Jameson gang. Everyone had. They were ruthless, violent men who left destruction in their wake. The thought of Cole riding out after them made her stomach clench with fear she hadn't expected to feel. Cole's jaw tightened as he processed the information. How many men? 6, maybe 7, armed and dangerous. They killed a bank clerk in Cedar Falls, Sheriff, and a customer who tried to stop them. Rebecca watched her husband's face transform as duty warred with the responsibility he felt to his family. She could see him calculating risks, weighing options, trying to find a way to protect both his town and his children. The children, who had appeared at the sound of horses, looked between their father and Rebecca with growing understanding of what this meant. "Papa," Samuel said quietly, and the pain in his voice made Rebecca's heart clench. "You're leaving, aren't you?" Cole knelt down, pulling his son into a fierce hug. "I have to, Samuel. It's my job to keep people safe. That includes all of you." "But what if something happens to you?" Mary's voice was barely a whisper. "What if you don't come back?" The question hung in the air like smoke, poisonous and inescapable. Rebecca saw the fear in her children's faces, the same terror they'd felt when their mother died. They couldn't lose another parent. They wouldn't survive it. "He'll come back," Rebecca said firmly, surprised by the strength in her own voice. "Your father is the best sheriff in the territory. He'll catch those men and come home to us." She looked directly at Cole as she spoke, willing him to believe her words as much as she was trying to convince the children. Cole stood slowly, his eyes never leaving Rebecca's face. "You'll take care of them." "Always," she replied without hesitation. "We'll take care of each other." He nodded once, then kissed each of the children goodbye. When he reached Rebecca, he hesitated for just a moment before cupping her face in his hands and kissing her deeply, passionately, like a man who had something precious to lose. When he pulled away, his eyes were dark with emotion. "I love you," he said quietly, and Rebecca's world tilted on its axis. "I should have said it before, but I love you, Rebecca, all of you." Before she could respond, before she could even process what he'd said, Cole was mounting his horse and riding away with the messenger. Rebecca stood in the yard with 4 frightened children clinging to her skirts, watching the man she was just beginning to realize she loved disappear into the distance, possibly forever. The waiting was agony. 3 days passed without word, and with each sunset that brought no sign of Cole's return, Rebecca felt the children's anxiety growing like a living thing in the house. Samuel tried to be brave, taking on extra chores and checking the locks on the doors each night with the solemnity of a man 3 times his age. The twins clung to each other and to Rebecca, rarely venturing beyond the front porch. Emma had nightmares that left her sobbing in the dark. calling for both her papa and her mama, until Rebecca's heart felt like it might shatter from the weight of so much fear and love. On the fourth morning, Rebecca was kneading bread dough with more force than necessary when Mrs. Patterson from the general store appeared at her door. The older woman's face was grave, her usual chatty demeanor replaced by something that made Rebecca's blood run cold. "Rebecca, dear, I thought you should know. There's been word from Cedar Falls." Rebecca's hands stilled on the dough. Behind her, she could feel the children growing quiet, sensing the shift in the air. What kind of word? "There was a gunfight yesterday evening. The posse caught up with the Jameson gang near Miller's Creek." Mrs. Patterson paused, clearly struggling with how to continue. "Some of our boys were hurt, Rebecca, bad hurt." The wooden spoon slipped from Rebecca's fingers, clattering to the floor. "Cole." "Nobody knows for sure yet. The messenger was pretty shaken up, couldn't give clear details about who was hit and how bad, but—" Mrs. Patterson's voice dropped to a whisper. "He did say there were some who didn't make it, honey. I'm sorry." Rebecca heard Emma gasp behind her, felt Samuel move closer until he was pressed against her side. The kitchen suddenly felt airless, like all the oxygen had been sucked away. She forced herself to breathe, to think, to be the strong one these children needed even when her own world was threatening to collapse. When will we know more? Could be today, could be tomorrow. Doc Henderson rode out this morning to tend to the wounded. He'll bring back word about everyone. Mrs. Patterson reached out and squeezed Rebecca's shoulder. "I'll pray for good news, dear. Cole Hartwell is a tough man. If anyone can come through this, it's him." After Mrs. Patterson left, Rebecca found herself standing in the kitchen surrounded by 4 pairs of eyes that looked to her for answers she didn't have. How do you tell children that their father might be dead? How do you hold on to hope when your own heart is breaking? How do you be strong enough for everyone when you feel like you're drowning? "Is Papa dead?" Emma's voice was so small it barely qualified as a whisper. "I don't know, sweetheart." Rebecca knelt down and gathered the little girl into her arms. "But I know your papa is smart and careful and brave, and I know he loves us enough to fight as hard as he can to come home." "What happens to us if he doesn't come back?" Matthew's question was practical, brutal in its honesty. "Where do we go?" Rebecca looked at each of their faces. Samuel trying so hard to be grown up, Mary and Matthew holding hands like they could anchor each other against whatever storm was coming, Emma with tears already tracking down her cheeks. These children had already lost so much. They couldn't lose everything again. "You don't go anywhere," Rebecca said firmly. "You stay right here with me. This is your home and I'm your family now no matter what happens. Do you understand me? No matter what." "But you're not really our mama," Mary said quietly. "The law might not let you keep us." Rebecca felt something fierce and protective rise up in her chest, something that burned hotter than fear or grief. "The law can try to take you away from me, Mary Hartwell, but I promise you this, they'll have to go through me first, and I won't make it easy for them." That afternoon, Rebecca did something that surprised even herself. She walked into town with all 4 children and marched straight into the office of Judge Morrison, the man who handled legal matters for 3 counties. The judge was a stern man with silver hair and wire-rimmed spectacles who had never particularly liked the idea of Cole marrying someone so young. Rebecca had always felt intimidated by him, but today she felt nothing but determination. "Judge Morrison," she said without preamble, "I need to know what happens to Cole's children if something has happened to him." The judge looked up from his papers, clearly surprised by her directness. "Mrs. Hartwell, I hadn't expected to see you today. Have you had word about the sheriff?" "No, and that's why I'm here. These children need to know they're safe, no matter what news comes from Cedar Falls. I need to know what I have to do to make sure they stay with me." Judge Morrison removed his spectacles and cleaned them slowly, studying Rebecca's face. "Well, legally speaking, your marriage to Sheriff Hartwell does give you some claim to the children. But you're very young, Mrs. Hartwell. The court might decide that someone older, more established, would be better suited to raise 4 orphaned children. Like who? Rebecca's voice was sharp with challenge. Who else in this town has stepped up to care for these children? Who else has sat up all night when they're sick, learned their favorite songs, kissed their scraped knees? I may be young, Judge Morrison, but I'm the only mother these children have. Be that as it may. Rebecca stepped closer to his desk, her hands flat on the polished wood. Judge, I need you to understand something. Those children have already lost their birth parents. They nearly lost their father when their mother died, and now they might lose him again. I will not let them lose anyone else. If you try to take them from me, I will fight you in every court in the territory. I will make so much noise that every newspaper from here to Denver will know how this town treated 4 orphaned children. And I will win, Judge Morrison, because I have something no one else can claim. I have their love and they have mine. The judge was quiet for a long moment, studying Rebecca with new interest. Behind her, she could feel the children holding their breath, waiting to see if their newly formed family would survive this latest threat. Finally, Judge Morrison nodded slowly. If Sheriff Hartwell doesn't return, I'll make sure the proper papers are drawn up to formalize your guardianship. You have my word. Rebecca felt her knees go weak with relief, but she kept her voice steady. Thank you, Judge. That means everything to us. Walking home, Samuel reached for Rebecca's hand, the first time he'd initiated physical contact since the wedding. You really meant it, didn't you? About fighting for us. Every word, Rebecca replied, squeezing his small hand. You're stuck with me now, Samuel Hartwell, all of you. That evening, as Rebecca was tucking the children into bed, Emma looked up at her with solemn eyes. Rebecca, can I tell you something? Of course, sweetheart. I think Mama would like you. I think she'd be happy that Papa married you. Emma's words were simple, but they hit Rebecca like a physical blow. For weeks, she'd felt like she was competing with a ghost, trying to measure up to a woman she'd never met. But maybe that wasn't what these children needed. Maybe they needed someone who honored their mother's memory while creating new memories of their own. Thank you, Emma. That means more to me than you know. Will you sing to me the song you sang when I was sick? So Rebecca sang Amazing Grace in the gathering darkness, her voice soft and sure. One by one, the other children joined in from their beds, their voices blending in harmony that spoke of healing, of hope, of a family that was finding its way through the darkness together. When the song ended, the house was quiet except for the gentle sound of children breathing in sleep. Rebecca was washing dishes when she heard the hoofbeats. Her heart stopped for a moment before racing into a rhythm that made her dizzy. She dried her hands slowly, afraid to hope, afraid to look outside and find it was just another neighbor with more bad news. But when she finally forced herself to peer through the window, she saw a familiar silhouette against the moonlight. Cole sat slumped in his saddle, favoring his left side, but he was alive. He was home. Rebecca ran outside without bothering to grab a shawl, her bare feet hitting the cold ground as she rushed to his horse. Cole looked down at her, his face pale and drawn with exhaustion and pain, but his eyes were warm with something that made her feel like she was flying. You waited, he said simply, as if he doubted she would. Of course I waited. Rebecca's voice was thick with tears she hadn't realized she was crying. I told you we'd take care of each other. Cole slid down from his horse with a grunt of pain, and Rebecca saw the blood-soaked bandage around his left arm, the careful way he held himself that suggested other injuries she couldn't see. But he was alive, he was home, and when he pulled her against his chest with his good arm, she felt like she could breathe again for the first time in 4 days. I love you too, she whispered against his chest. I should have said it before you left, but I was scared and confused and I didn't understand what was happening to me. But I love you, Cole Hartwell. I love you and I love our children and I love the life we're building together. Cole pulled back to look at her face, and she saw wonder there and joy, and something deeper that made her feel cherished in a way she'd never experienced. Our children. Our children, Rebecca confirmed. Judge Morrison is going to make it official, but they've been mine from the moment I married you. They're mine to love and protect and worry about and be proud of, just like you're mine. Cole kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise. When they broke apart, they found 4 small faces pressed against the upstairs window, grinning down at them with the kind of joy that only children can feel when their world is finally, truly safe. Inside, Cole allowed Rebecca to fuss over his wounds while the children peppered him with questions about the gunfight, the outlaws, and whether he'd been brave. He told them edited versions of the truth, enough to satisfy their curiosity without traumatizing them with the brutal reality of what he'd faced. The Jameson gang had been stopped, 3 of them killed and the others captured. No more innocent people would suffer at their hands. "Did you kill them, Papa?" Matthew asked with the bloodthirsty curiosity of an 8-year-old boy. "Some of them," Cole replied honestly. "When bad men hurt good people, sometimes that's the only way to stop them." Rebecca watched her husband's face as he spoke, seeing the weight of what he'd done, the cost of the choices he'd had to make. Later, when the children were asleep and she was helping him change the bandage on his arm, she would ask him about it. She would listen while he told her about the fear he'd felt, not of dying but of leaving his family orphaned again. She would hold him while he grieved for the men he'd killed, even knowing they deserved their fate. She would be his partner in all things, not just the easy ones. But for now, they sat around the kitchen table like the family they'd become, sharing coffee and leftover biscuits while Cole told stories that made the children laugh. Rebecca watched them, her husband, her children, and felt something settle in her chest that she'd never experienced before. Contentment, belonging, home. "Rebecca," Cole said quietly, reaching for her hand across the table. "Thank you, for taking care of them, for being strong, for not giving up on us." "Thank you for coming home," she replied, lacing their fingers together, "for fighting to come back to us." "Always," Cole promised, and Rebecca believed him. They'd face whatever came next together, the good and the bad, the easy and the impossible. They were a family now, forged in crisis and strengthened by love. And that was enough, more than enough. It was everything. 6 months later, Rebecca stood in the kitchen of what was now truly their home, watching through the window as Cole taught Samuel how to properly care for the horses. Her hand rested unconsciously on the gentle swell of her belly, where their first child together grew beneath her heart. The news was still new, shared only between her and Cole in whispered conversations after the children had gone to sleep. They were waiting for the right moment to tell Samuel, Mary, Matthew, and Emma that they would soon have a brother or sister. Rebecca wanted to be sure this pregnancy would hold, wanted to be certain before raising hopes that might be dashed. The morning sickness had been her first clue, followed by the telltale signs she recognized from watching other women in town. Dr. Henderson had confirmed what she already knew, his examination gentle and his smile warm as he congratulated her. "Mrs. Hartwell, you're about 3 months along. Everything looks perfectly healthy. You should expect this little one around early spring." Cole's reaction had been everything Rebecca could have hoped for and more: joy, wonder, and a protective tenderness that made her fall even deeper in love with the man she'd married. He'd held her close that night, his large hands spanning her still flat stomach, whispering promises to the child who couldn't yet hear them. "You're going to be so loved, little one. You have the best mama in the world, and you're going to have brothers and sisters who will protect you with their lives." But today brought a different kind of challenge, one that threatened to shake the foundation of everything they'd built together. Rebecca had been hanging laundry when she saw the elegant carriage approaching, its polished black surface and fine appointments immediately marking it as belonging to someone of wealth and status. She dried her hands and smoothed her hair, wondering who could be visiting them in such style. The answer, when it came, left her reeling. The woman who stepped down from the carriage was beautiful in the way that money and privilege could make someone beautiful. Her dress was the finest silk, her hat adorned with exotic feathers, her gloves soft leather that had never known honest work. She was perhaps 40, with silver threading through her dark hair and lines around her eyes that spoke of someone accustomed to getting her way. When she looked at Rebecca, there was something in her gaze that made Rebecca's skin crawl. Assessment, judgment, and something that looked dangerously like ownership. "You must be Rebecca," the woman said, her voice cultured and cool. "I'm Eleanor Hartwell, Cole's sister-in-law, Sarah's sister." Rebecca felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Cole had never mentioned Sarah having family, had never spoken of anyone who might have a claim on the children. She forced herself to remain calm, to keep her voice steady. Mrs. Whitmore now, though I was Eleanor Garrett when Sarah and I were girls." The woman's smile was sharp as a blade. "I've come a very long way to see my sister's children. I trust they're well." "They're very well," Rebecca replied carefully. "Cole should be back from his round soon. Would you like to wait inside?" How thoughtful. Eleanor's tone suggested she found nothing thoughtful about the offer at all. "Yes, I believe I would like to see how my nieces and nephew are living." Rebecca led Eleanor into the house, acutely aware of every sign of their modest circumstances. The furniture that had seemed adequate now looked shabby under Eleanor's critical gaze. The children's toys scattered around the room, the patched curtains, the simple wooden dishes, everything that had felt like home suddenly felt like poverty under the scrutiny of this elegant stranger. Emma appeared from the back room, her hair braided with ribbons Rebecca had sewn herself, her dress clean but clearly mended in several places. The little girl stopped short when she saw Eleanor, her thumb finding its way to her mouth in the way it did when she was nervous or uncertain. "Emma," Eleanor's voice changed, becoming softer, warmer. "My goodness, you look so much like your mother. Come here, sweetheart, let me look at you." Emma glanced at Rebecca uncertainly, then slowly approached the beautiful stranger. Eleanor knelt down, her expensive dress pooling around her, and gently touched Emma's face. "You were just a baby when I saw you last. You probably don't remember me, but I'm your Aunt Eleanor, your Mama's sister." Mama's sister, Emma's eyes widened with wonder. "Really? Really? And I've missed you so much." Eleanor's voice was thick with genuine emotion now, and Rebecca felt a stab of something that might have been fear. This woman loved these children. That much was clear, but what did she want with them? The other children appeared one by one, drawn by the sound of voices and their natural curiosity about the elegant visitor. Eleanor greeted each of them with tears in her eyes, exclaiming over how much they'd grown, how much they resembled their mother. Samuel was cautious but polite. The twins were fascinated by Eleanor's fine clothes and jewelry, and Emma was completely charmed by this aunt who had appeared like something from a fairy tale. When Cole returned from his rounds, his face went white as snow at the sight of Eleanor sitting in his parlor with Emma on her lap. Rebecca had never seen her husband look so shaken, so completely off balance. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, his hat in his hands, clearly struggling to process the appearance of this ghost from his past. "Eleanor," his voice was rough, uncertain, "what are you doing here?" Eleanor looked up at him with eyes that held years of pain and accusation. "Hello, Cole, you look well. Fatherhood suits you." Her gaze flicked to Rebecca, and there was something in that look that made Rebecca's blood run cold. As does marriage, apparently. "How did you find us?" Cole stepped into the room, but he kept his distance from Eleanor, as if she were something dangerous that might explode without warning. "It took some doing," Eleanor admitted. "After Sarah died, I wrote to you several times. The letters came back undelivered. It was as if you'd simply vanished, taking my sister's children with you." Her voice grew harder, more accusatory. "I finally hired a detective to track you down. Imagine my surprise when I learned you'd remarried. A girl barely out of childhood, from what I'm told." Rebecca felt heat flood her cheeks, but Cole stepped forward, his jaw tight with anger. "Rebecca is my wife and the mother of these children. You will speak of her with respect, or you can leave." "Mother of these children," Eleanor's laugh was bitter. "She's been in their lives for what, 6 months? I am their blood, Cole. I am Sarah's sister and I have rights." "What rights?" Cole's voice was dangerous now, and Rebecca could see the sheriff in him, the man who faced down outlaws and killers. "You never came to Sarah's funeral. You never sent word when she was dying. Where were these rights when we needed help?" Alina flinched as if she'd been slapped. "I didn't know she was ill. My husband, Charles, forbade me from maintaining contact with Sarah after she married you. He said it wasn't appropriate for someone of my station to associate with." She gestured vaguely, unable or unwilling to finish the sentence. "With what? A sheriff? A man who worked for a living?" Cole's anger was building now, and Rebecca could see how this was going to end if someone didn't intervene. She stepped forward, placing a calming hand on Cole's arm. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately," Rebecca suggested quietly. "The children don't need to hear this." Alina stood, gently setting Emma aside. "Actually, I think the children should hear this. They should know that they have family beyond this situation. They should know that there are options available to them." "Options?" Samuel's voice was small but clear. "What kind of options?" Alina turned to him with a smile that was meant to be reassuring but somehow felt predatory. "Well, Samuel, I live in a beautiful house in San Francisco. I have servants and gardens and all the finest things in life. You could have tutors instead of that little one-room schoolhouse. Mary and Emma could have beautiful dresses and learn to be proper young ladies. Matthew could attend the finest schools in the country. You could all have everything your mother would have wanted for you." Rebecca felt the children's attention shifting, saw the wonder in their eyes as Alina painted pictures of a life they could barely imagine. For a moment, she felt utterly defeated. How could she compete with gardens and servants and fine schools? How could she offer them anything that compared to the life Alina was describing? But then Emma tugged on Alina's dress, her small face troubled. Would Rebecca come too? And Papa? Alina's smile faltered slightly. "Well, sweetheart, your papa has his job here and Rebecca has her own life to live, but you wouldn't need them anymore. You'd have me and Uncle Charles and everything you could ever want." "I don't want everything," Emma said with the devastating honesty of a 6-year-old. "I want my family." "But darling, I am your family. I'm your real family." "Rebecca is my real family too," Emma insisted. "She takes care of me when I'm sick. She sings to me. She loves me." Alina's composure cracked slightly, and Rebecca saw the pain beneath the polished exterior. This woman had lost her sister, had been denied the chance to know these children she clearly loved. But love, Rebecca was learning, wasn't always enough. Sometimes love meant letting go, and sometimes it meant fighting for what was right even when it hurt. "Mrs. Whitmore," Rebecca said quietly, "I understand that you love these children. I can see it in your eyes, but they've already lost so much. They can't lose their home, their father, their life here. This is where they belong." "Belong?" Alina's voice rose slightly. "They belong with family, with people who can give them opportunities, who can provide for them properly. Look around you, girl. Look at this place. Is this really what you think Sarah would have wanted for her children?" Before Rebecca could answer, Samuel stepped forward. At 10 years old, he was already showing signs of the man he would become, steady, thoughtful, protective of those he loved. "My mama wanted us to be happy," he said quietly. "She wanted us to be loved and safe and together. Rebecca gives us all of that." "And what about education? What about your future? What opportunities will you have in this God-forsaken place?" "The same opportunities their father had," Rebecca said firmly. "The chance to grow up knowing they're loved, knowing they belong somewhere, knowing they matter. All the fine schools in the world can't give them that if they're separated from everyone who loves them." Alina was quiet for a long moment, studying the children's faces. Rebecca could see her calculating, weighing options, trying to find another angle of attack. When she spoke again, her voice was softer but somehow more dangerous. "I'll be in town for several days," she said finally. "I'm staying at the hotel. I'd like to spend time with the children to get to know them again. Surely you can't object to that." Cole and Rebecca exchanged a look. They couldn't refuse. Alina did have a relationship with the children, did have some rights as their aunt. But Rebecca felt a chill of premonition, a certainty that this woman would not give up easily. "Of course," Cole said finally, "but the children stay here at night. This is their home." "For now," Alina agreed, and the words sounded like a threat. Over the next 3 days, Alina waged a careful campaign for the children's hearts. She brought gifts, beautiful dolls for the girls, a fine leather saddle for Samuel, toy soldiers for Matthew. She told them stories about their mother as a young girl, shared memories that none of them had ever heard. She took them to the hotel for elaborate meals and let them order anything they wanted from the menu. She bought them clothes finer than anything they'd ever owned, and spoke constantly of the wonderful life they could have with her in San Francisco. Rebecca watched it all with growing despair. She saw the way the children's eyes lit up when Alina arrived each morning, saw how they began to look forward to her visits. Mary spent an entire afternoon practicing curtsies that Alina had taught her. Emma began asking when they could see Aunt Alina's beautiful house. Even Samuel, usually so loyal and steady, seemed dazzled by the possibilities Alina dangled before them. The breaking point came on the 4th evening, when Alina didn't bring the children home at their usual time. 6 o'clock came and went, then 7, then 8. Rebecca paced the kitchen while Cole sent inquiries around town. Finally, they found them at the hotel, where Alina had arranged for the children to have dinner in the fancy dining room with white tablecloths and crystal glasses. "I'm sorry we're late," Alina said when Cole appeared in the doorway of the dining room. "The children were having such a wonderful time, I couldn't bear to end it." But Rebecca could see the calculation in Alina's eyes, could see that this had been deliberate. The woman was testing boundaries, seeing how far she could push before Cole and Rebecca pushed back. She was also showing the children what their life could be like: elegant dinners instead of simple meals at home, luxury instead of the modest comfort they'd known. That night, after the children were in bed, Rebecca and Cole sat at their kitchen table trying to figure out what to do. Alina clearly wasn't going to give up, and with her wealth and connections, she might well have legal options they couldn't fight. "She's going to try to take them," Rebecca said quietly. "I can feel it." Cole nodded grimly. "The question is whether she can succeed. A rich widow with a fine house might look more suitable to a judge than a young woman and a sheriff living in a small town." Rebecca's hand moved instinctively to her belly, where their unborn child grew. She hadn't told Cole about her other fears, that the stress of this situation might harm the baby, that Alina might somehow use Rebecca's pregnancy against them. A woman expecting her first child might be seen as too distracted to properly care for 4 others. "What do we do?" Rebecca asked. Cole reached across the table and took her hand. "We fight. We show everyone, the children, the court, the whole damn town if we have to, that these kids belong with us, that this is their home." But even as he spoke, Rebecca could hear the uncertainty in his voice. They were about to face the fight of their lives, and the stakes couldn't be higher. 4 children's futures hung in the balance, along with the family they'd worked so hard to build. And Rebecca couldn't shake the feeling that Alina Whitmore was just getting started. The legal papers arrived on a Tuesday morning that had started like any other. Rebecca was teaching Emma her letters at the kitchen table while the boys helped Cole with morning chores, and Mary practiced her sums. The knock at the door was formal, official, and when Rebecca opened it to find a well-dressed man with a leather satchel and an apologetic expression, her heart sank before he even spoke. "Mrs. Hartwell, I'm Thomas Mitchell, attorney for Mrs. Alina Whitmore. I have some documents that require your immediate attention." He handed her a thick envelope sealed with red wax. "I'm sorry to be the bearer of difficult news, ma'am." Rebecca's hands trembled as she broke the seal and scanned the legal language that might as well have been written in a foreign tongue, but certain phrases jumped out at her with crystal clarity: petition for custody, best interests of the minor children, unsuitable living conditions, inadequate provisions for proper education and moral development. Alina wasn't just threatening anymore. She was taking action. Cole appeared in the doorway, took one look at Rebecca's face, and immediately understood. He read the papers with growing fury, his jaw clenching tighter with each page. "She's claiming we're unfit," he said finally, his voice barely controlled. "Says the children would be better served in her care." "There's more," the attorney said reluctantly. "Mrs. Whitmore has also petitioned the court to conduct an immediate investigation into the household. They'll be sending someone to evaluate the living conditions, interview the children, assess their welfare." Rebecca felt the world spinning around her. Everything they'd built, everything they'd fought for, was about to be put under a microscope by strangers who didn't know these children, didn't understand what they'd all been through together. When? "The investigator will arrive tomorrow morning. Judge Morrison has granted an expedited hearing due to Mrs. Whitmore's concerns about the children's welfare." The attorney paused, clearly uncomfortable with his role as messenger. "I want you to know, Mrs. Hartwell, that Mrs. Whitmore genuinely believes she's acting in the children's best interests. She's not doing this out of malice." "Isn't she?" Cole's voice was ice cold. "She shows up here after ignoring these kids for years, fills their heads with promises of luxury, and then tries to tear them away from the only stable home they've known. What would you call that?" The attorney had no answer for that. He left them with instructions about the hearing date and a list of documents they would need to gather. Rebecca stood in the doorway long after his carriage disappeared, the legal papers crumpled in her fist, trying to figure out how to explain to 4 children that their world was about to be turned upside down again. The children took the news about as well as could be expected, which was to say not well at all. Emma burst into tears and refused to be comforted. Matthew flew into a rage, shouting that he hated Aunt Alina and didn't want to live in any stupid fancy house. Mary retreated into herself, becoming so quiet and withdrawn that Rebecca worried she might never speak again. Samuel, trying to be brave, asked practical questions about what would happen to their pets, their belongings, their friends if they had to leave. "Nobody's taking you anywhere," Rebecca said firmly, gathering them all close around the kitchen table. "We're going to fight this and we're going to win, but we need to be strong together, okay? We need to show everyone that we're a family." "What if the judge decides we have to go?" Mary's voice was barely a whisper. Rebecca looked at each of their faces, seeing the fear that was already too familiar, the expectation of loss that no child should carry. She thought about the baby growing inside her, the future they'd all planned together, the life they'd built from nothing but love and determination. "Then we'll figure out another way," she said finally. "But I promise you this, I will never stop fighting for you. Never, even if it takes the rest of my life." Cole reached for her hand across the table, his fingers warm and steady. "We'll figure it out together. That's what families do." The investigator arrived the next morning as promised. A thin, severe woman named Mrs. Caldwell who carried a clipboard and wore the expression of someone who had seen too much of life's ugliness and expected to find more. She walked through their house with critical eyes, noting everything from the patched curtains to the children's simple clothing to the modest furniture that had seemed perfectly adequate until yesterday. "The children sleep 4 to 2 rooms?" Mrs. Caldwell asked, consulting her notes. "The boys share 1 room, the girls share another," Rebecca replied, trying to keep the defensiveness out of her voice. "They prefer it that way. They like being close to each other." "And your income, Sheriff Hartwell?" Cole named a figure that sounded pathetically small when spoken aloud in the stark light of legal scrutiny. "It's enough," he added quickly. "We manage fine. The children never go without anything they need." Mrs. Caldwell made notes without comment. She interviewed each child separately, asking them questions about their daily routines, their happiness, their feelings about their living situation. Rebecca wasn't allowed to be present during these interviews, and the waiting was agony. What were the children saying? Were they being honest about their feelings, or were they perhaps mentioning how exciting Aunt Eleanor's gifts had been, how wonderful her hotel dinners were? When Mrs. Caldwell emerged from her interview with Emma, the little girl was crying. She ran straight to Rebecca and buried her face in her skirts. "She asked if you were mean to me," Emma sobbed. "She asked if I was scared of you or Papa. I told her no, but she kept asking and asking." Rebecca's heart broke for her daughter, who was being forced to defend the only stable home she'd known to a stranger who seemed determined to find fault. She held Emma close and whispered soothing words while Mrs. Caldwell made more notes on her clipboard. The investigation continued for 3 grueling hours. Mrs. Caldwell examined their food stores, their medical supplies, the children's school books. She questioned Rebecca about her background, her education, her experience with children. She asked Cole about his work schedule, his absences from home, his ability to provide emotional support to traumatized children. "And you've only been married 8 months?" Mrs. Caldwell asked, consulting her notes again. "Yes, ma'am," Rebecca replied. "That's a very short time to establish a stable family unit. These children have already experienced significant trauma and loss. Some might argue that introducing another major change so soon after their mother's death was ill-advised." Rebecca felt heat rise in her cheeks. "These children were on the verge of being separated and sent to an orphanage when I married Sheriff Hartwell. We provided them with stability and love when they needed it most." "Love is admirable, Mrs. Hartwell, but it's not always sufficient. Mrs. Whitmore can provide educational opportunities, cultural enrichment, and social advantages that simply aren't available here. She has the means to ensure these children reach their full potential." "And what about their emotional potential?" Rebecca shot back. "What about their need to feel secure and wanted and part of a family that actually knows them? Money can't buy that, Mrs. Caldwell." The investigator made another note, her expression unreadable. When she finally left, Rebecca felt drained and defeated. How do you defend a life that looks ordinary against one that promises extraordinary? How do you prove that love matters more than luxury to someone who measures everything in dollars and opportunities? That evening, Eleanor appeared at their door again. She looked different somehow, less polished, more uncertain. There were lines of stress around her eyes, and her usual confident demeanor had cracks in it. "May I come in?" she asked quietly. Cole wanted to refuse. Rebecca could see it in his face. But the children had heard her voice and came running. Despite everything, they were still drawn to this aunt who showered them with attention and gifts. Eleanor hugged each of them, but her eyes never left Rebecca's face. "We need to talk," Eleanor said when the children had settled in the parlor with books and toys. "All of us, about what's best for everyone." They gathered around the kitchen table like adversaries preparing for battle. Eleanor looked tired, older than she had just days before. The legal proceedings were taking a toll on her too, Rebecca realized. This wasn't easy for anyone. "I saw Mrs. Caldwell today," Eleanor began. "She's very thorough, very professional." "She's very good at making a loving home look inadequate," Rebecca replied sharply. Eleanor flinched. "That wasn't my intention, I want what's best for them. They're all I have left of Sarah." "They're not possessions, Eleanor," Cole said quietly. "They're not pieces of your sister that you can collect and keep. They're children with their own feelings and needs and attachments." "Don't you think I know that?" Eleanor's composure cracked, and for the first time Rebecca saw the raw pain underneath. "Don't you think I've thought about this from every angle? I lost my sister, Cole. I lost the chance to know these children, to be part of their lives. My husband forbade it, said it wasn't proper for someone of my station. And I listened to him. I chose my social standing over my family, and by the time I realized what a mistake that was, Sarah was dead and you were gone." Tears started rolling down Alina's cheeks, and Rebecca felt her anger beginning to soften despite herself. This woman was grieving too, had been grieving alone for years while the children she loved grew up without her. "I'm not trying to hurt them," Alina continued. "I'm trying to give them the life Sarah would have wanted for them. She always dreamed of better things, always wanted more for her children than what she had." "Sarah wanted her children to be happy," Rebecca said gently. "She wanted them to be loved and safe and together. I never knew your sister, but I know her children. And they're happy here, Alina. They're loved here. Taking them away from that isn't giving them a better life. It's destroying the one they've built." Alina was quiet for a long moment, studying Rebecca's face with new interest. "You really love them, don't you? It's not just about being married to Cole or having a ready-made family. You actually love them." "With everything I have," Rebecca replied without hesitation. "They're not just Cole's children that I take care of. They're mine. In every way that matters, they're mine." "And they love you," Alina said quietly. "I can see it in the way they look at you, the way they turn to you when they're hurt or scared. They trust you completely." "Yes, they do." Alina stood up abruptly and walked to the window, looking out at the darkening sky. "My husband died last year," she said suddenly. "Heart attack, very sudden, and I found myself alone in that big house with all those beautiful things and no one to share them with. I thought maybe if I could have the children, I wouldn't be so alone anymore." The admission hung in the air like smoke. Rebecca felt her heart ache for this woman who had lost so much and was now trying to fill the emptiness with other people's children. But understanding Alina's pain didn't make her claim any more valid. "You don't need to be alone," Rebecca said carefully. "You could be part of their lives without taking them away from their home. You could visit, write letters, be their aunt who loves them and spoils them and tells them stories about their mother. But they belong here, Alina, with us." Alina turned back to face them, and Rebecca saw something in her eyes that looked like resignation. "The hearing is in 3 days. Judge Morrison will make his decision based on Mrs. Caldwell's report and the evidence presented by both sides." "And what will you tell him?" Cole asked. Alina was quiet for so long that Rebecca thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft and sad and final. "I'll tell him what's best for the children, even if it breaks my heart." She left without saying goodbye to the children, and Rebecca wondered what that meant. Was Alina giving up her fight, or was she simply preparing for battle in a different way? 3 days felt like both a lifetime and no time at all. 3 days to prepare for a hearing that would determine whether their family survived intact or was torn apart by the very legal system that was supposed to protect children. That night, Rebecca lay in bed with Cole's arm around her and their unborn child growing beneath her heart, listening to the soft sounds of their children sleeping in the rooms nearby. Tomorrow, they would begin preparing their defense, gathering character witnesses and documents that proved their fitness as parents. They would prepare to fight for their family with everything they had. But tonight, she just held onto this moment of peace, this feeling of completeness that she'd never known before Cole and the children came into her life. Whatever happened in that courtroom, whatever Judge Morrison decided, she would never regret the choice she'd made 8 months ago. She would never regret becoming a mother to 4 children who had needed her as much as she'd needed them. The sound of Emma crying out in her sleep sent Rebecca hurrying to the children's room, where she found the little girl tangled in her blankets and calling for her mama. Rebecca gathered Emma into her arms and rocked her gently, singing the lullaby that had become their song. Gradually, Emma's breathing evened out and she settled back into peaceful sleep. As Rebecca tucked the covers around her daughter, she whispered a promise into the darkness. "Whatever happens, sweetheart, you'll always be loved, always be wanted, always be mine." 3 days to save their family. Rebecca only hoped it would be enough.